my God. They told me I'd really like the video, but I had no idea just how awesome it would be. Thank you, thank you. This whole team has just been so incredible. Your hospitality, the cocktails. Obviously, that's why you're here, right? It's not for some geeky talk about measuring the impact of media. Sorry, but that's what I'll be talking about now, but you can enjoy cocktails while I talk about it. So, I'm based at a think tank at a university in Los Angeles, the University of Southern California, and I'm based at the Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism. And it's one of these places in academia that actually works a lot with the industry. And so that was one reason that I was excited about going back to academia after I had worked in the video game industry for some time. And before that, I was working in web startups. And one reason I was excited about this was the kind of scholarship that was coming out of this school. One of the most famous scholars to come out of the Annenberg School is named Everett Rogers. He's one of the most cited social scientists in the world. And if you've ever heard the phrase early adopter, well, that's the dude. He talked about social networks 30, 40 years before we knew what a social network was. He was the guy who talked about diffusions of innovation. How do you get people to adopt new socially progressive technology? And one of his projects that I heard him talk about actually soon before he died at the Annenberg School, right after I was hired. And I'd been working at Vivendi Universal Games. I was working on all these video games that were supposed to teach people foreign languages and how to play chess and teach kids math. And you know, it worked really well. There are a lot of kids, a lot of learners who don't operate well in a typical academic situation. So I saw the value of these games, but I was more interested in the theory. You know, how do you use entertainment in order to improve the world? How do you use it to teach people who don't want to be taught? Well, Everett Rogers, his passion project at the time, after being this super famous global social scientist hero, was to go to places like Africa, to go to Tanzania, to work with the national radio broadcast system there, and put together a radio soap opera, a drama about a truck driver who had HIV, and he had a woman in every single port. And it was his story. And what they did is they broadcast this radio drama to about half the country, and they didn't broadcast it to the other half. So it was an experiment, a controlled experiment. Would HIV rates go down in the area where the radio soap opera was playing? And would they go up where it wasn't playing? Well, it turned out that the difference was so drastic in terms of HIV rates going up in the areas where the radio soap opera wasn't playing that they had to actually call off the experiment. And that made me think, oh man, we should do this kind of work here in the United States. And the Centers for Disease Control had come calling. They were very interested in us because we were a research institute that did academic research in communication and media, but we had very friendly relationships with the industry. A lot of people who graduated from our school go to work at CBS, ABC, NBC, Disney. So we knew how to talk their talk. We understood the business. We could perhaps be intermediaries. Because the Centers for Disease Control, our primary federal health agency in the United States, was getting all these calls from writers on TV shows. At the time, ER was a really popular show. And they were calling saying, okay, we need to know what does a woman look like if she's having an HIV-positive baby and it's early. And CDC did not know how to work with storytellers on how to write a TV drama about these issues. So they wanted somebody on the ground in Los Angeles who could be this intermediary. And the other reason that they'd finally decided to do this is that they had an annual survey called the Health Style Survey. And somebody finally convinced them to include a few questions about media consumption. And these questions included things that revealed that a majority of Americans thought that every bit of health information in fictional TV shows was correct. that it had been vetted by some doctor, which of course it had not most of the time. And about a quarter of Americans, as you know, many of whom have no access to professional health care, said it was one of their main sources of health information. So, the CDC had also heard that there was this whole field of communication media research, which Everett Rogers, the superstar, had really elevated, that was showing through social science evidence and scientific experiments that you could actually change people's knowledge, attitudes, and behavior through entertainment. So, they ended up investing in us, and we launched a program in 2001 called Hollywood Health and Society. Since then, we've branched beyond health topics, but we really started in that sweet spot. We thought it would be the easiest sell to writers in Hollywood. Who wants to write a story that has inaccurate information about health stuff in it? You know, who wants to be the guy who tells people the wrong thing about breast cancer? Now, this is a $632 billion industry. Well, actually, that's the number from 2015. This year, it's a $771 billion business. So it's very hard for us, a little think tank at a university, to really get these guys to do anything we want them to do. But we think of ourselves as kind of parasites, you know? It's like a symbiotic relationship. They're the elephant. We're just trying to nudge them in the positive social direction. And so we have a whole program where we work with hundreds of shows on dozens of networks, cable and streaming channels. These are sitcoms, they're daytime soapies, they're, you know, hardcore. Breaking Bad we worked with a lot. There's a lot of health information in there. And in 5 years, just 5 years, we've been running since 2001, we got over 1,100 storylines on the air. Of course, they call us about a lot of storylines that don't quite get on the air, but we had 1,100 on the air. If you think about a show like Scandal, which we consult with all the time, they get about 11 million viewers just the first time it's on the air in the US. All these shows go into syndication. Some of them, like House, which we consulted on every single goddamn episode of that show. It's a diagnostic nightmare, everything, and, you know, they're calling us constantly. That was seen by about 1 billion people each year. So all that health information that we managed to cram in there gets seen by a lot of people. We also, of course, we give them awards. People in Hollywood like awards, you know? Give them awards. We got a red carpet. We do briefings. We do panel discussions. We partner with the Writers Guild of America. We try not to act like advocates. Instead, we're a resource. And what we get to do on the side is a bunch of research in order to figure out if this is actually working. Because the CDC and the other people who fund us will not give us a dime unless we're able to show them that actually fitting these storylines into entertainment content actually moves the needle. Now, this is very difficult work, as you can imagine. It's really hard to isolate variables. It's very hard with entertainment and media because there's a huge self-selection bias, right? Not all of you watch the same stuff or listen to the same music. We have different taste. And so you have to take into account people's taste before you can figure out whether a media intervention actually worked or if you're just preaching to the choir and the person who hears your message already knew it or already thought so. So this is our challenge. But it's been made easier. This kind of research has been going on since about the 1970s. Now we have digital platforms, we have all kinds of data about how you're consuming media and entertainment, and that makes our job easier. There's email lists where we can reach you 6 months after you've seen a documentary film, and we can find out, did you do anything? Did you make a donation? Did you change your diet? So these are the kinds of outcomes that we can start measuring now that we have digital platforms. We use all kinds of social science methods in order to figure this out. We do, for instance, content analysis. We figure out exactly what the messages are in media in a very sort of rigorous and quantitative fashion. Of course, we collect all kinds of media analytics, whatever's available. And then we have to do survey research. We have to give you a quiz, basically. We have to ask you about your attitudes. And we can only witness your behavior online, right? We need a survey in order to find out if you did something offline. One of our innovations is to do very highly targeted surveys. So if you encounter a piece of media within a digital platform, if we have permission, we can collect the data about your interaction and engagement with that media, likes, shares, views, whatever. And then we can administer surveys based upon your behavior. And then we can figure out whether certain patterns of behavior are associated with certain changes in knowledge, attitudes, or behavior. We also do experiments, A/B testing. We do interviews because sometimes we're not interested in the way a piece of media has an effect on the general public. We're interested in the effect that it has on policymakers, influencers. So that's more of a one-to-one sort of data collection situation. We'll do focus groups, but not of audiences generally. It's more of the organizations, like advocacy organizations, that can end up using a documentary in order to have a screening, in order to raise money, in order to re-educate people who are already within their choir, people who already agree with them. So it can build capacity within advocacy groups. And then the easiest way to really kind of connect the dots between, okay, somebody saw this TV show and somebody did something, is to basically have a PSA, a 1-800 number, a website. Do you see a big uptick in visits to a website after that link is posted right after some moving storyline? Same with a 1-800 number. So one of our earliest examples, which is just a handy one, was with a soap opera, Bold and the Beautiful, still one of the most popular shows in the world. If you've ever been to India, you'll see just how popular it still is. Now, in the year that we did our storyline on HIV in The Bold and the Beautiful, we had 2 opportunities to post a PSA, here's a number you can call to find out more. And in that year, there were several other efforts to try to get people to call this hotline. So you see 60 Minutes had a piece, there was something on BET television, there was a Surgeon General's PSA, but our first Bold and the Beautiful PSA was right after this dude found out that he was HIV positive. So people called, right? But then he told his girlfriend. Then that was actually the highest number of calls that hotline got all year. And these were very well-funded efforts. This was 2 MTV specials over here that didn't even do anything as well as this very low-rated, in the United States, soap opera. So this is an example of how embedding a health message into an entertainment storyline and getting it in front of the right audience, because it's usually not people like this guy who are watching The Bold and the Beautiful during the day. It's more like this gal who might be worried that her boyfriend is HIV positive. She's the one who started calling after that PSA aired. Now, one reason that entertainment is so powerful at transmitting information is something that's called transportation. By transportation, I mean engagement, absorption, getting lost in a story. What's really happening is you're turning off a lot of the cognitive sifters and filters that are in the way of you perhaps hearing a new message. And a lot of this is aligned very well with some theories coming out of evolutionary biology. Why do we waste our time playing? Why do we waste our time telling fake stories to one another? Well, some people would claim that there's a survival interest there. It's a simulation, right? You're testing out a new world, a new idea. You're stepping into somebody else's shoes. What would I do? So it's a moment where new ideas and new notions can seep in. We have a few research examples of this, of course. We work with a lot of the telenovelas. They're really good at including long health storylines, which they allow us to help them consult on. And a storyline on this telenovela, El Clon, on Telemundo, was actually about getting pap smears. We had survey respondents saying they had signed up for their very first pap smear after they started watching this storyline in this limited soap opera. You may have seen this episode. I've seen it like 12 times, and I don't know why it's on all the time. It's an old episode of SVU with Narda Lee. She is from the Democratic Republic of Congo. She's seeking asylum in the United States. She tells all these stories about the nightmarish process of trying to get asylum in the United States. Well, we administered pre-post surveys, and it turns out people actually learned all about the asylum process from this episode. Now, what's really powerful about this is nobody tuned into this episode to learn about the asylum process or to learn about conflict minerals, in the DRC. But they just happened to, because they were there for the characters and for the story. One other reason that entertainment is so powerful at transmitting ideas and information is because there's this function of identification that can happen. It doesn't happen for everyone, obviously, but you know it. You know there's been characters that you identify with. It's a very profound emotional connection. And we've found that the more people identify with characters and/or are transported into a story, the more likely that they'll remember things, they may have attitude shifts, and they may actually change their behavior. So here's an example of a storyline we did on American Crime.
Dying scared is...
What's that like? Well, dying scared.
It's dying scared. That's what it is. You're alone, and you got nothing but fear. And then the paramedic showed up, right? With Narcan. And give you a shot right up the nose. Right? Just like that. I'm all right. So what we'd start doing is we start shooting up right around the firehouses, right? UOD, they're right there. Things get hectic, they're right there. It just got to be regular.
Are you with us? You're with us. We're gonna get you to the hospital, okay?
So we found that people who said they identified with Coy, was the main character here, they learned about opioids, and one thing we've noticed is that the more that a protagonist looks like the audience recipient of the message, the more likely they are to remember it accurately. So if you want to speak to young African American women, guess what? Don't use an old white guy. They also said they had more support for treating opioid abuse as a public health issue rather than as a personal fault. And they were more supportive of federal funding. They also said that they were more likely to get involved in opioid treatment and prevention efforts. What? Actively search and share information? That's quite typical. And to visit an NA or CDC website for more information. This information-seeking behavior is often quite typical of people who have really strong identification with characters in shows. Now, here's another research project that we did fairly recently that I really like. There's a lot to tell about it. I'll just let you watch a little clip, get a sense of the story.
Your shortness of breath could be a sign that clots have broken off and scattered to your lungs. And I have to ask, how long have you been a girl? Do your parents know that you're taking estrogen?
My mom tries to be supportive, but she insisted I see a therapist.
Well, you get the gist of that storyline, right? I hope you could hear the first question. He's like, how long have you been a girl? And you can imagine people who were watching this episode on a pretty conservative, it's on the USA Network in the United States, which is a very mainstream, basic cable network. This is not the kind of network where you would see a show about LGBTQ rights, and they've probably never had a transgender character on any show on this channel. So we were really excited that they asked us to help them with the storyline, and then they let us do an impact assessment. And this was especially interesting to us because we knew that it was a very broad ideological array of people who watched this show. So we knew, and from our survey we found out for sure, that there were a lot of very conservative people who watched this show, and they said, before they saw this episode, that they thought transgender people were disgusting. Now, we found a big change after they watched this episode if they had seen at least one other storyline that was about a transgender character. If they saw two storylines about transgender people, their ideological bias against transgender people was actually cut in half. Now, if they had seen a bunch of news stories about transgender issues, and this is when Caitlyn Jenner had just come out, had no effect on their ideological opposition to transgender people. But if they were transported by the story and had a sense of identification with this young girl, it was far more likely that they would support transgender policies, and we asked about a whole bunch of issues that were in the media at the time about bathrooms and sports and all of this stuff. And we saw really profound differences. And the big thing was that it was overcoming ideological barriers in a way that news and journalistic content did not. And it was cumulative in effect, which is something that we had seen in many studies since the 70s, where serialized shows, especially the ones that are 5 days a week, like soap operas, those can have a really profound effect on people. How many people know about East Los High? This is an online series. It's really popular on Hulu. Yeah, you guys don't know about it, do you? Well, it was a really sexy show about hot Latinas and East LA. It was really well done. And they decided to weave in a lot of health information. They got a lot of funding from foundations, actually, to do this work, but you would never, ever know it because it was very kind of sexy. So they did 3 storylines that we monitored. We did a lot more studies, but I'll talk about 3 storylines. One was on abortion, one on immigration, one on alcohol abuse. Here's a scene from the abortion storyline.
How do you feel?
Fine. I just took the pills. They said it takes a few hours.
And how do you feel?
I'm kind of a mess. I just want this to be over. If it wasn't for you, I'd feel pretty alone.
Well, I'm not going anywhere. And I read about this after abortion talk line called Exhale if you ever want to talk to someone.
Thanks.
God, I still can't believe Jesus went to Mexico.
Screw him. This isn't about him. I would have done it anyway. I'm just not ready to be a mom.
So in all 3 of the storylines, we found, surprise, surprise, that the more people identified with the main characters, the more we saw attitudinal change. And we had access to very detailed media analytics about people's viewing habits of these shows. Oh my God, they'd watch them over and over and over again, watch them with their friends, watch them alone. That was one of the new things that we did with this study, is we looked at social viewing. Did it have any particular impact on the outcomes? Did it make a difference if you watched it alone, if you binge watched it, if you watched it with the second screen and social media? It turned out, and sorry, these are very wonky charts, but it turned out that with co-viewing, that is with other people, second screening, and with a face-to-face discussion afterwards, having a chance to say something about the storyline, we saw bigger shifts in support for abortion. With binge watching, we saw exactly the opposite, that the binge watching it did not increase the effect of you being supportive of the action taken in the storyline. And you'll see that the same sort of the purple line as binge watching happened with all three of the storylines that we were monitoring. So we have all kinds of theories about why that's the case, but chew on that and let me know at the bar what you think is the reason that binge watching ends up sort of undermining the social impact of television storylines. I know we're a little bit behind here, so I'll kind of speed up a bit. We've done a lot of work in Bollywood as well. India has been very progressive in terms of putting educational messages into their entertainment content. There's huge viewership of soap operas there, and it's a really great opportunity to reach people, some of whom are completely illiterate, but somebody in the village has got a satellite dish and they're all watching the same soapy 6 days a week. So we put in some health messaging about the pentavalent vaccine, and we saw that over time, the more episodes that people were watching, the more likely it was that they were able to identify the diseases that the pentavalent vaccine protected against. We also did this in Nigeria, but in Nigeria, the TV scene is not really the big deal. In Nollywood, it's film. So we produced a film that was about rape culture in Nigeria, which is a thing. It is a big problem. And we were able to reach people who would watch the film and very similar people who had not seen it through Facebook. Because thanks to Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook is free in Nigeria. So we were able to reach thousands of viewers and thousands of people who had not seen it, and we saw profound differences between people who had viewed the film and people who had not, in terms of their acceptance of statements like, "It is okay for a man to have sex with a woman even if she says no." If you'd watched the film, it's a little less likely you'd be willing to agree with the statement. Similar here, there is nothing a man can do to prevent rape. And women, you'll see, were very strongly affected by the film. Now, our Hollywood Health and Society program has been around since 2001. In 2013, we launched what we called the Media Impact Project, where we decided to branch out from scripted television content to films, both fictional and documentary. We do VR, journalism on all kinds of different platforms. We wanted to test these methods in many different media venues. We've worked with lots of partners, lots of media partners, lots of foundations. And when we work with media partners like this, we get access to the data, which makes it a lot easier to kind of connect those dots between exposure and some sort of outcome that we're curious about or looking for. One project we did was the documentary film Food Inc. How many have seen it? There's got to be, yeah? Oh, yeah. This documentary is pretty damn successful. So this is made by Participant Media, a film company based in Hollywood that has a double bottom line, right? They're trying to create social impact with their films, and they're also trying to make a buck. So they asked us to do an impact assessment of this documentary, and I'll show you the trailer now.
The way we eat has changed more in the last 50 years than in the previous 10,000. The modern supermarket has on average 47,000 products.
The industry doesn't want you to know the truth about what you're eating, because if you knew, you might not want to eat it.
We've never had food companies this powerful in our history.
Everything we've done in modern agriculture is to grow it faster, fatter, bigger, cheaper.
If you could grow a chicken in 49 days, why would you want one you got to grow in 3 months?
When you go through the supermarket, there is an illusion of diversity. So much of our industrial food turns out to be rearrangements of corn.
Sometimes you look at a vegetable and say, okay, well, we can get 2 hamburgers for the same price.
They have managed to make it against the law to criticize their products.
There is an effort to make it illegal to publish a photo of any industrial food operation.
I find it incredible that the FDA wants to allow the sale of meat from cloned animals without any labeling.
Peanut butter contaminated with salmonella.
E. coli has been found in spinach, apple juice.
Smells like money to me.
The average consumer does not feel very powerful. It's the exact opposite. When we run an item past the supermarket scanner, we're voting for local or not, organic or not.
Look at the tobacco industry.
The battle against tobacco is a perfect model of how an industry's irresponsible behavior can be changed.
Imagine what it would be if, as a national policy, the idea would be to have such nutritionally dense food that people actually felt better, had more energy, and weren't sick as much. You know, now see, that's a noble goal.
People have got to start demanding good, wholesome food of us, and we'll deliver, I promise you.
I know, people loved that movie, man. It was really effective. And the people I know who didn't see it said, well, I don't want to become a vegetarian, so I'm not going to go see it. But actually, you know, if you saw it, it didn't actually urge people to become vegetarians. But a lot of people did after watching it. So what we did, and I can go into more detail on this at the bar if you're curious about methodology, but we basically tried to create the equivalent of a matched control group. We had a huge email list. Participant Media has this massive email list of over 1 million people. So we got 20,000 people to take a survey. And we didn't tell them it was about Food Inc. because we wanted to make sure that we found a bunch of people who might see Food Inc., but they hadn't watched it yet. Maybe it was in their Netflix queue at the time. Who knew? But what we did is we created this statistical model that would predict the likelihood that you would go watch a movie like that. And it involved a lot of these variables. Then we found a ton of people in this survey sample who had exactly those, that array of characteristics as the exposed group, but they didn't see Food Inc. Then we checked to see whether there were differences in terms of the outcomes that Participant Media had been hoping for with this film. And we noticed some big differences. We saw that the people who saw the film, compared to very similar people who just hadn't seen it, were more likely to say that they had encouraged friends, family, and colleagues to learn more about food safety, which was a core issue in the film. They were more likely to be shopping at their local farmers markets, and they were eating healthier food. What we really wanted to do was do this with a feature film. Did you guys see Contagion, the Soderbergh film? How many people? Okay, not as many as Food Inc. So this was a big blockbuster film, you know, with all these A-list stars. People did not go to see this film because they wanted to learn about a global virus, right? They wanted to go see, you know, Kate Winslet. They wanted to see Gwyneth Paltrow die. I wanted to see Gwyneth Paltrow die. Here's the trailer.
It was a groundbreaking ceremony for a new factory.
Did she mention seeing anyone who was sick? Anyone on a plane, the airport?
No, she said she was jet-lagged.
The average person touches their face 3 to 5 times every waking minute. In between, we're touching doorknobs, water fountains, and each other.
Beth. No, go up to your room, honey.
So we have a virus with no treatment protocol and no vaccine at this time.
You had a seizure this morning, Beth.
She had a history of seizures,
No.
allergies.
As of last night, there were 32 cases.
Unfortunately, she did die.
Right. And he says, can I go talk to her?
Mr. Amoff, your wife is dead.
What are you talking about? Okay. What happened to her? What happened to her?
Is there any way someone could weaponize the bird flu? Is that what we're looking at?
Someone doesn't have to weaponize the bird flu. The birds are doing that.
Watch this. It's transmission, so we just need to know which direction.
On day 1, there were 2 people, and then 4, and then 16. In 3 months, it's 1 billion. That's where we're headed.
They're calling out the National Guard. They're moving the president underground. People will panic.
Get away!
It will tip over.
The truth is being kept from the world.
Cook your samples, destroy everything. Hello. I need need you to get me the names of everyone who serviced this room. It's an emergency.
You can't panic now.
I know.
I'm gonna get you home.
I got people too, Dr. Cheever. We all do.
Don't talk to anyone. Don't touch anyone. Stay away from other people.
Get back in your car. We're not sick.
It's figuring us out faster than we're figuring it out.
It's mutating.
So we did a similar kind of study where we had access to this massive email list, created this matched comparison group, looked for differences in outcomes, and found that people who had seen the film were more knowledgeable about viruses. We, administered this little quiz. It was more likely they had prepared an emergency kit. They were washing their hands more frequently, and if you've seen this film, you know why. And they had talked to friends, family, and neighbors about viruses. One of the most powerful things about entertainment and media storytelling is that it puts something on your agenda that you weren't necessarily thinking about before. Now, what was really important about this study, and I have to say about all the film studies that we've done, is that we didn't administer this right after people walked out of the theater. We do it 6 months later, a year later. This one, these effects lasted 3 years after people saw the film. So, we started working on journalism as well. The Guardian news, we worked with them. They have a whole section that's just on global development topics. It's probably the least popular section in any newspaper in the world. People just think, oh, yeah, we can't solve those problems. So, the Gates Foundation has been funding coverage on global development topics all around the world and hoping and praying that it's actually having some sort of impact. So they asked us to work with The Guardian to figure out whether it was. Once again, we created these 2 target groups through our surveys because we knew the behavior of people on the website. We found our control group in people who were reading international news on the World News section, which is massive. None of those people knew about the Global Development site, which was a very small site, wasn't well branded, pretty well hidden. And we did a comparison to see if there were outcome differences between these 2 groups. We found that people who had gone to that Global Development site were more aware of the Millennium Development Goals. This was right at the end of MDG. Now we're on the SDGs now. We just did a new study with them, too. We found out that they were more knowledgeable about the Millennium Development Goals. They knew what they were, actually. And they were more likely to have taken 2 actions based on stories that they had read on this site. One was signing a petition of some sort, and another was changing their mind based on Guardian reporting, which was really exciting for the Guardian reporters. Once again, there was the sense that they were somehow transported by these stories. They were willing to think differently about the world based on this reporting. But of course, we go back to the Gates Foundation, and they said, oh, there's only 2 things, 2 actions that people were more likely to take. What about all the other actions? What predicted that people would take all these actions that we asked about based on global reporting? And we thought, oh, well, we know what it'll be. It'll be this statistical model that we put together that predicts the likelihood that you would visit a page on the Global Development site, and we were totally wrong. It turned out to be how people answered this question. How much of a difference do you think an individual could make to reduce poverty in poor countries? The people who thought that individuals have a lot of power, lo and behold, were more likely to have taken all of these actions. The only action they were less likely to have taken, or no more likely to have taken, was to change their mind about an issue. And this falls right in line with a whole field of social psychology research that informs a lot of entertainment education and media effects research. It has to do with self-efficacy, right? If you don't think you're capable of doing something, you're probably not even going to try. And this guy, Albert Bandura, who is as famous a social scientist as Everett Rogers, has created experiments ever since the 1970s showing that this modeling of behavior in order to build self-efficacy doesn't have to be in person. that actually it's extremely effective, you guessed it, on screens, in media. When you see images of people like yourself doing something on a TV screen, on a film screen, in a book, in a comic book, it makes you more likely to think that you could accomplish it too. So I was wondering, how can we use, oh, here's the robot telling me I need to stop. I thought, how could we use this information in order to help communicators? Anybody who's trying to get a message out through media, right? If you're writing a press release, if you're making a documentary, if you're trying to convince your friends of something on a video, what can you do in order to make sure that people will have a good enough sense of self-efficacy to actually follow through on the action plan that you have for them? And there's this wonderful research that's come out of the University of Texas, Austin, called the Engaging News Project. They've worked with this great team called Solutions Journalism Network to do a bunch of experimental research to figure out what works. And what they found is that if you write journalism, and you can think of any sort of communication in this way, that includes solutions in it and not just the problems, you actually build self-efficacy in readers. You find that they have increased interest, they feel inspired, and they think they can contribute to a solution to the issue. And some elements that they've identified, also, of course, they're more willing to get involved, they're more likely to say they'll donate money. But the kinds of things that work in communication that builds people's self-efficacy includes explaining the causes of the problem and not just whining about the problem. Describing responses to the problem, whether they worked or not. It can help people start thinking through the problem and trying to solve it themselves. Giving how-to details is really crucial. Not just saying that something worked is enough. People want to know more. And presenting evidence of results. So these are some of the elements that came out of that research that I felt could be helpful to anybody who's trying to communicate something. And guess what? We are all media communicators now. It's not just the big broadcasters, it's all of us. And we have a huge responsibility in that power. So we've done a ton of research, as I've mentioned, with a lot of different news organizations, including Frontline, which is a public broadcast entity in the United States. They've been experimenting with virtual reality journalism. And they just weren't sure. Is it worth the resources? Does it make a difference to do a story in VR opposed to doing a very highly polished 2D video version? And so I'll very quickly go through the results here. But we found that people tended to have an extraordinary experience in the VR version opposed to the non-VR version. That was the biggest difference. But was there an attitude shift with VR opposed to just seeing a 2D documentary? No, absolutely not. Did we see changes in empathy? No. And that's something that you hear a lot in the popular press, that VR can generate new kinds of empathy that wouldn't otherwise be there. What we did, in fact, find was that there was a knowledge gap between people who saw the video version versus people in the VR version. In the VR version, they were so busy moving around and exploring the area that they didn't learn as much as people did in the more boring video version. So there are trade-offs, obviously, in this kind of journalism. We also found that people were far more likely to say that they would seek out more frontline journalism if they had never really encountered it before, but they saw it in this VR context. So we helped create some guidelines for journalists based on this kind of experimental research, which there really hasn't been a lot of it done. So I'm kind of scratching the surface because we have 19 years of research, but you can check out either of these websites for a whole bunch of research studies. You can seek me out at the bar, where I'm definitely going to have another black hole. And I thank you so much for your attention. You guys have been really attentive. I'm surprised. Thank you. Thanks to my team.